Welcome to Shattered the Podcast. STP is the story of my journey from the depths of mental illness to a place where I could live again. Well, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the show a person that I have gotten to know a little bit over the last couple of weeks, Joyce L Campbell. She's a psychotherapist. She's national board certified, and she's a licensed professional counselor. Joyce, g'day, mate. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you, Mark?
I am terrific, and all the better for being able to chat to you today.
Thank you.
I want to dive into your book because I finished it now. We had a short chat last week, and after that chat, I plowed through the book. There's so much that I want to pull apart from that, but I'd like to start by just letting people know that even though we've mentioned all your credentials and qualifications, it would be fair to say that you have lived experience of mental illness as well.
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, as a child, I was sexually abused, not by anyone in my direct family, but someone from the extended family. And unfortunately, again, because of the family system that I was in, I couldn't tell anyone. So I carried shame for many decades and lived in that cage, if you will, of bad self talk. There's something wrong with you. What did you do to bring that on? Um, you're a mistake. You shouldn't have been born. Those types of self talks that bring your brain into a very bad place because every time you say it, you reinforce and strengthen those neuronal pathways. Your neurons are reinforced, and those pathways stay, and you default to them. However, the good news is your brain can be rewired, and so they can be replaced with the truth, with the good news, what's correct. And when the old pathways aren't used, the negative thoughts, they actually die out of disuse. So it's a wonderful thing that the brain can do. We've been created so that we can have our minds renewed.
Mhm. Now, there's going to be people listening to this that are in the same space that we have been. They're in the middle of that self-doubt. They're in the middle of that shame spiral. They're in the middle of whatever their mental illness is putting them through.
Yeah.
And they're going to be thinking, the future is gone. I don't have a future now. What I love about your story is that I believe it was from you were very young. You thought psychotherapy, therapy, psychoanalyst would be something that you would be interested in pursuing. Is that correct?
That's correct. And yet they were so few and far between. And again, I couldn't bring that need up to my family. So I suffered for many decades, literally, and had suicidal ideation. And yeah, it was a very horrific place to be.
Yeah. So, uh, when did you decide that sort of psychotherapy, the therapy route was the way that you wanted to go? At what point in your life did you decide to do that?
Well, it was pretty early on. I started reading. I would go to the library and get mental health books. Um, and yet again, it was impossible for me to address. I couldn't talk about it. I knew I would be unsafe, or I would be talking to unsafe people, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
So I was, yeah, well into my 30s before I actually picked up the phone and made the first appointment. And I was shaking because I didn't know exactly what to expect. And yet I knew that I had to make that call, or I would say stuck in the situation, in the mental state that I was. And it was distorted.
We often assume that the person that we choose to speak to is going to respond well to our situation, and it can even be a therapist that doesn't that can inadvertently be an unsafe person to talk to. How important is it to be sure of the people that you're sharing this stuff with?
Oh, absolutely 100% sure is the best. Um, because, yes, more harm can be done. The band aid that's on the wound can be ripped off, and then you start back at point zero. It can feel like it, at least, for sure.
No, I
But my
get it.
husband was gracious, and I knew he was safe, and so that's where I started.
Sorry, I talked over you there. You said it was your husband that you spoke to.
Yes, I knew he was completely safe for me, and he definitely received it with grace and compassion. And so then I felt, okay, I can do this. It's going to be hard, but
And again, there's so many things about your story that I would love to unpack. But as I said, I need to get to your book because uh, I'm a person that has a very outgoing personality. I don't like to call myself an alpha, but I kind of fit that mold. I'm independent. I do what I want when I want to. But uh, your book highlighted to me a behavior that I had lived with and lived under that I hadn't identified before. Now, you talk about it a lot as part of your book as subjugation. I
yeah,
would love to just first off, we'll tell people what the book is because everybody's sitting there going, oh, this book, this book. It's Dare to Say No. Stop saying yes when you really mean no. So the book itself, let's first off, let's try and understand subjugation.
okay. Subjugation is simply deferring to other people. Um, it involves people pleasing, but it's more than that, because you cross your line of integrity. You give up what you believe to be true, or what you really have an opinion of, or where you want to go for dinner. And in it, you lose who you are. You lose yourself in the dysfunction. And so much so that some clients I've asked, well, what do you enjoy doing? You know, what? And there's just a blank face, because they've honestly put others before themselves to such a degree that they have forgotten, they've lost what they used to enjoy. It's really, really extremely sad.
There's a couple of aspects that you draw out in the book, but the one that spoke the most to me was when you look at a situation like a domestic situation, and you think that, say, domestic violence (DV) is physical. You forget so much that it can be that emotional, that domineering, that subjugating abuse, which can be, in my estimation, even more harmful.
Yes, very true. In fact, studies have shown that as people age, that's more the reason, subjugation, for committing suicide than any physical abuse. So, and I shouldn't have said age. Um, Perhaps as they become more aware of what's going on, they often think, well, there's no hope. I can't get out of this, which is a lie, out of the pit of hell. And, but they often accept that as truth.
It's interesting that you talk about a couple of different cases, and I'd like to go into two of them in particular. One was it was actually a man that was subjugated by his wife, which really surprised me. You said that in the book that there was a woman that came into your office and she said, "Look, my husband's just told me that he's leaving me and I have no idea why."
Right, exactly. And as we began to talk, and I usually do an intake, which goes into why they're there, how they're presenting, and any medical issues or those type of things. Um, so in that, I can often pick up cues and clues as to what has brought them to that place. And for her, it was definitely subjugation of him. I mean, she was the subjugator, and he just went along with it. He was quiet, and so he just really shut down and withdrew into a shell. And she ran the show, where they would go on vacation or what they might do on a given night. It was pervasive. And so he felt like the only way of curing it or getting out of it was to get divorced. But of course, he took that baggage with him.
Yeah. And he, to my understanding, is that relationship was unsalvageable
Correct.
because he had quite literally reached his limit.
Yes, he could not, he just couldn't see to do that at all.
There's another story in the book, and it's about a husband and wife who couldn't decide where to go for a holiday.
Right.
This is brilliant. I love this story.
That was true, and it's so funny when you see exactly what happened. Later, it's funny. It wasn't funny then, but they were talking about where to go on vacation, and he said, "Well, why don't we go back to Cabo?" And she said, "Well, okay." And so they did, and they were there for a few days and had done all the activities that they wanted to do. And so one afternoon they were sitting under a umbrella and having a drink, and he said, "You know, I am really bored." And she said, "Well, so am I, but I thought you wanted to go here, so I said okay." And he said, "Well, I thought you wanted to, so that's why I said let's go there." So unfortunately, they both ruined their time that they could have spent in a far different place and had more fun and learned more. And yeah, so they learned that they were subjugating to each other,
Yeah.
and so they walked through that, and now they can laugh about it and actually, when they ask a question, make sure, "Are you sure you're not subjugating to me?" And they can laugh about it. But
I find it interesting because when you have an illness in your body, you you will often get a symptom. You'll notice something. Something just isn't right. What I
mhm,
loved about that couple and their story particularly is they identified a symptom,
yes,
and it might have seemed inconsequential. "Oh, we defer to each other a little bit more than we
right,
probably should."
right.
Um, it's so easy for that to become more than just a kind of a comical, misunderstanding. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm when we're when I'm listening to you, I had the picture of a couple, and you've probably witnessed this times too, that you may be out to dinner and they're not speaking to each other, they're not engaged at all, and it just breaks my heart when I see that. And I wonder what has brought them to that place. And it can be subjugation, where they've been married so long and just deferred to where they think, well, I guess this is it. So here we are, which is a horrible way to live.
Another fascinating aspect of the book, and it's something that I really, I did a double take when I first read it, It was about the idea that you can subjugate yourself to memories, to trauma, to
Yes.
difficulties, to
Yeah.
experiences. Do you mind unpacking that for us for a little bit? Because, as I said, I was really surprised when you highlighted that in the book, but it struck me as so, yes, I never thought of this.
Yes, absolutely. One thing that comes to mind is when a person has a physical illness, and they give up and just decide, well, this is my fate, and I'm going to just live this way. And then what comes to mind is while I was doing my research, one of the examples that really struck me was a woman that had written a book about kids, actually. And she could not leave her home because of physical problems. And yet she decided that was not going to be the end all at all, and that she was going to research and study and write books, and that's exactly what she has done. So we can subjugate to healthy health or lack of health, I should say. We can also subjugate to a tragedy. Just a couple years ago, we lost our 2-year old grandson, and every day it's difficult. And we might open a cabinet and see one of his little toys, and it all comes to the forefront, and or see a little boy with blonde hair, and it's really difficult. But I determined that that wasn't going to be the end of my life. Little Jack would not have wanted that to be. He was a happy little guy. And so it's the determination, the perseverance to say, okay, no. And yet, where do I go from here, Lord? Where do I go from here? And He will direct our paths if we will submit to Him in the situation.
What is interesting to me is even when I've talked about your book to other people, I've mentioned the title and I've said, "What do you think of this?" Dare to say no. And it can appear to be quaint. It can appear to be even trite in certain
Mhm.
people's heads. But when you've seen somebody that has lived under that subjugation and has their mental health has been destroyed by that situation, you gain just an inkling of how devastating it can actually be.
Absolutely. Actually, I had a client just the other day text me, and she said, I have your book on the counter right here, and just reading the title as I walk by sometimes just really triggers the truth that, okay, I'm going to grow. I'm going to come out of this with hard work and sometimes medication and lots of therapy. Absolutely.
Now, your book is great because it's not just a resource that you put on the shelf. You've got practical things in there. You've got, I want to call them exercises for want of a better word, because there's going to be people listening to this that are going to want to know, what is the difference for me? How do I recognize when I'm being subjugated as opposed to just, I'm just a deferential person? That's just my nature. What are some of the signs that people can look for so that they can notice this, that they are being subjugated?
Okay. Well, one that is so key is that if you feel any dread um, in answering the person, that is a really red flag that you need to look at. The possibility that you are subjugating to something that would not agree with your opinion of something or your belief. And when that's the case, you usually do feel some degree of dread. So that's a real red flag.
No,
And
that's a good one. We've mentioned it a couple of times. I'm going to mention it again. The book is Dare to Say No. Stop saying yes when you really mean no. Where can people get a hold of this book?
it's available now on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and many, many other bookshops globally, actually. So,
I had no trouble buying it myself. I just put it in the search engine and it was the first thing that came up.
right.
Um, your website as well. I want to note for people that this is not just a website that's all about, hey, read my book. There's a lot on there. There's parts of your story. There's lots and lots of information. Was that intentional?
Yes, very much so. Because I want people to understand that I've gone through what I've gone through, including the education, getting the master's degree, going through the national board, et cetera, for them. um, I was, I had gone through 6 years of therapy myself. So at that point, I was pretty healthy. And yeah, I was wanting to give back.
I think I mentioned it before. I don't like the idea of going to, say, a dentist that's never had a toothache. They're
Mm,
never really going to understand what my position is. And that was the beauty in reading your book and talking to you is, yes, you're a psychotherapist. Yes, you've got your master's. Yes, you're board certified, but you're talking from experience. You're not
yes,
talking academically. The book
absolutely.
itself, I encourage people to get out and get it. It's an amazing book. The tip about if you feel dread when somebody asks you to do something or somebody imposes something on you, such a great tip. The book is very, very helpful. There's lots and lots of things in there that you'll find extremely helpful. I want to finish out the interview, Joyce. I want to give you what I call the final word. I'm going to
Okay.
give you just say 30 seconds to say whatever is on your heart about the book, what you hope people might take away from it, and just your heart around that book. So I've thrown you under the bus. 30 seconds, final word, go.
Okay. So I wanted to give back. I wanted to see people be healed and to come out of the negative state of mind that they perhaps were in and definitely were in when they would come to see me as a therapist. And to know that through hard work and dedication, in this case, doing the steps that are needed to get to the place they want to be in health, that would be available to them. There are other books that are about people pleasing and so forth, and yet having read them, I know that mine is more comprehensive, that there's far more in it, far more education that's enjoyable to learn more about yourself and how this can be overcome.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I did find that as well. I can testify to that. That I did. I read a book. I felt educated. I felt equipped when I finished it. I didn't feel like, okay, now I know what the problem is. I've got to go get some help. It was like, okay, I can identify the things that I need to guard against in my own life.
Right.
Joyce, Joyce, I want to thank you so much for your patience. You've been so generous with your time. I just appreciate you, mate. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mark. I certainly appreciate you, and I so appreciate the time we've had together. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Shattered the Podcast. I'm Mark. Special thanks to my producer, Meredith Brosnan, and also to Torian, Kevin, and Lorraine. And we can't forget the amazing band Adelaide, who let us use their song as our theme. For more information, check us out on all your socials, STP Shattered the Podcast.